Holy shit, they made friends down there.
Friend. You want to talk about Friend? You want some epic, far-reaching, super cool theory about how cool Friend is? How it's going to aura farm the skibbity grizzlers and explode the entire world while punching sands into a pulp? Yeah, sure, let's do it. Let's talk about Friend. Now we're gonna do it my way. With a lot less aura farming and no skibbities. Instead, we're going to do it through video game storytelling mechanics and character analysis. I haven't cared for Friend much ever since its first appearance in the basement. It was a little funky picture that you couldn't even get a good look at in real time because of how fast it disappeared again. Everyone thought it was something related to Spamton because of the eye colors being the same, albeit switched up, and that was that. Then it made a few more similarly obscured appearances and some more direct ones. Still, all there was to go on was the two colors pink and yellow, and its appearances being near secret boss routes. The one in chapter 4 is just off in a random room, and Rousey's Dark World explanation is the furthest from secret you could be. But that didn't stop people from wildly theorizing about it, because Friend was aura farming, as the 9th graders vaping in the school bathroom would tell you. Or maybe as the 8th graders thinking the vaping 9th graders are cool would tell you. And because arguably the only concrete thing to associate Friend with were the two colors of pink and yellow, it became kind of a plug-and-play situation theory-wise. You could insert it anywhere those two colors appeared, and fuck me, they show up a lot. The secret bosses in Spamton, Gerson and the cats in the Eram fight, Caddy and Brady, Noel and Susie, Asgore, the pipe organ priests, Bluey and the mics, Swatchling, this anime transition thing in particular, Susie and Chris, the Where Wires, Noel and Chris, Rousey and Chris, and that is excluding all of the chapter 5 stuff. There are even more instances of yellow and pink showing up disconnected from each other, so if you really wanted, you could even use those to spin up whatever you wanted. So because of the extreme vagueness of Friend's existence and its infinite amount of perceived connectedness to the world of Deltarune, it felt impossible to actually give this little face a reason in the story that can plausibly tie into what we knew at that point. So I didn't. There was other stuff to keep my interest in Deltarune and, other things keeping my interest in life. Now, through the infinite monkeys on typewriters principle and credit where it's due, some smart connections, we did figure out that Friend is a cat. That's all. Not a lot of progress made in 5-ish years of theorizing. Okay, to be fair, that's all of the information we got confirmed, because Chapter 5 didn't reveal that much new stuff. But that all changed not with the release of Chapter 5, but with an update that directly added new dialogue to a certain shopkeeper. This awkwardly patched in new piece of text reveals something that I have not considered so far. The secretive trifecta of Shadow Crystal bosses, Image Friend, and the Egg Rooms are all one narrative string that is being braided together. And that got me interested. Now there's a more defined environment to put Friend in context with, and hopefully figure out what the hell it has been doing all this time. Before we get to Friend though, I have to get to the one thing that all of Deltarune's secret areas have in common. Chris, the protagonist of Deltarune. Video game protagonists are a fickle thing, because instead of looking into a story from the outside like in a book or movie, you embody and control a character in the story, usually the protagonist. Now when you want to have the player learn information about this character, there's two very common solutions. They become their own person in cutscenes and any kind of dialogue, while the player just has control in gameplay sections, basically making them like any other character in the game by just ignoring the fact that there is a player. Call of Duty campaigns are a great example for that. They even have multiple protagonists that you switch around between on a mission-per-mission basis. These characters are centerpieces to the story, and they all take their individual actions in the story regardless of your existence. You just do the shooting part in between. There really isn't any space to imagine yourself as Captain Price going off to collect tulips in a flower field. It's a very rigid story structure with defined characters that you're getting pulled through. Then there's option 2, which is the silent protagonist, where your character is a blank slate and you imprint yourself on them. All characterization of that protagonist is what you do, you think, and you feel because you are the protagonist. It's kind of a trick to immerse you in the world further and make you feel like your choices have more weight, because in the end the impact you have in the story is still prompted by the game. Pokemon games are a great example for that. You are prompted to choose a name and gender at the start of the game and then follow the more skeletal story structure with a lot of freedom in between to do whatever you want. Of course, in the end you still have to get prompted by the game to do certain things for story reasons, but in between you get the freedom to do these prompts as whoever you imagine. Now these protagonist choices are often tied to their genre. Typical action-adventure games like conventional protagonists because of their tightly scripted nature, and RPGs, specifically more open-world ones like silent protagonists to give you the freedom to create your own stories within their boundaries. Deltarune is somewhat in between these two camps, as an RPG with a restricted world that still has some freedom within it, so it only made sense for it to find a solution that also sits somewhere in the middle. It essentially does both. The soul is our actual silent protagonist that is the player in the most literal sense possible, and Chris is their own character that we control. But because we control them, they still can't take their own actions and we do not hear them speak. So that creates a little issue. If we have a protagonist that isn't characterized by our own actions and also rarely acts on their own, at least as long as the player is around, how can we learn about them? Chris is an integral part to the story, and if we learn nothing about their motives, background or feelings throughout it, the whole story would arguably suck a little more. Of course, Deltarune has found a few ways around that problem. For one, you can let someone else talk about them. Oh Chris, remember that time when you did so and so? There's plenty of examples for that, but it gets a little boring and unnatural when every second conversation Chris has is just somebody telling them something they already knew. There are of course a few instances of Chris fighting or control and taking actions of their own, but these are like a quarter of a puzzle piece, not enough to construct a motive or intention from. So Toby Fox had the revolutionary idea of employing this little thing called literary devices. Allegories, metaphors, foreshadowing, and symbolism, just to name a few. Of course they're all over the game, but the ones relating to Chris are for the most part found in these three more cordoned off narratives. To somewhat keep track of them, I'll have a little box over in the corner with some annotations. Even beyond the more convoluted writing choices, the connections to Chris are very obvious. The secret boss storylines often have them going off on their own, and Charm addresses Chris directly a bunch. The egg rooms are blatantly just about Chris. They inexplicably glitch out of the world without any of their party mates present, and the chapter 3 and 4 ones get even more personal. Friend itself has been showing up during some of these Chris sections too. It has also been in other places, which made it hard to associate with Chris 100%, but that is exactly what this new dialogue from the Pink Buddy changed. Friend as a cat being referenced in the dialogue together with the protein standing in for the eggs has cemented it as part of this whole charade. Not to mention the trifecta of technical requirements for the dialogue, that is visiting the egg room, finding the hidden friend creature in the garden, and defeating the secret boss. That is the premise of this video. Deltarune has a Chris-shaped hole needing to be filled with characterization that isn't badly paced, remember when that happened, dialogue, and these three storylines that we now know belong together have been perfectly filling it right under our noses. It's not a Shadow Friends super roaring end of the world powers of hopes and dreams secret omega boss fight for maximum aura. Deltarune and, to be honest, pretty much all other stories have something to say beyond just cool shit happening. Knowing what Deltarune wants to say instead of just pulling color-based free association bullshit out of thin air hopefully lets us get to a more realistic idea of what Friend is in less than 5 years. And I know I've put it in the title already, but to understand what part of that Friend is, we have to take a look at the Eggman and the Shadow Crystal bosses first. On its own, the egg rooms are the embodiment of Easter eggs, secrets, little things in between the game that you can only find if you look very hard. They are nostalgia of a time when some rumors or mysteries couldn't just be confirmed by looking into the code. They represent this uncertainty of not quite being able to tell what is and isn't real. There's a person behind the tree called the Forgotten Man, and they are very insistent about Chris remembering things about them. In relation to Chris, they are about processing an event in the past that maybe they are also uncertain if it did really happen. Chapter 4's Egg Room even potentially elevates that concept to the Egg Room standing in for therapy sessions, with the mysterious man behind the tree being that therapist. The tree is what Chris uses to block out that event. It seems almost impossible for them to recall what happened. When they try to draw it in art club, they just end up filling out the entire canvas and then paint a tree over it. There's something behind the tree that Chris is entirely unable to process. Maybe it is the man himself, maybe it is something else. But whenever they try to recall it, whenever they make an effort to not forget about it, they get an egg. As sort of a token of progress or a reward. Eggs are symbolic of rebirth, new beginnings, the potential in yourself. Every time Chris picks up an egg, they are making an effort to rebuild themselves, and the Forgotten Man is seemingly helping them by handing it over. The egg rooms are in a way us as the player rummaging deep in Chris's psyche to dig out a secret they would rather keep buried. Whether that's to their benefit or not is left up to interpretation. Even then, successfully collecting and placing all the eggs might complete our quest, but it doesn't inspire anything positive in Chris. A feeling of strange melancholy is more foreboding than anything else. Deltarune's secret bosses are cool, yes, maybe they do have aura, and I understand when people want to see more of them, but ultimately they are just characters in a story. They don't deserve extra screen time, they don't deserve to matter more in the story or to come back for some other cool moment. Each character serves their specific purpose in the narrative, and that's that. The fact that all of these bosses and characters stick around in Castletown and we get to talk to them for some funny novelty dialogue is already insane fan service by Toby. In the case of Deltarune's secret bosses, their purpose is twofold. For one, the aforementioned purpose of providing characterization of Chris through allegories, comparisons, all that good stuff, or sometimes just letting us see Chris's reaction to everything. Secondly, to give us some more information on the shadow client that is behind the secret bosses. The character who seems to be the actual antagonist through this entire more secretive side of Deltarune. But that's kinda secondary to this video, so I won't focus on it too much for now. The shadow crystals themselves don't play into that whole thing too much. Their purpose is just to enable that final Shaum event he promised in chapter 5. But you probably know most of that already, so let's do a quick roundup of what the secret bosses tell us about Chris. I haven't seen much talk about Jevil in regards to Chris, but I think there's actually a lot here to draw parallels with. For one, Jevil being jailed corresponds to Chris being the cage with a human soul. The soul stands in for Jevil while Chris is the actual jail. Jevil says he's the free one in jail while everyone else is locked away from him, and that greatly lines up with our situation in Deltarune. While it seems like we are trapped in Chris's body, in the great scheme of things we are free to walk away from the computer and do anything else at any point in time. At the same time, it seems like we as the player have a lot of power in the world of Deltarune if it wasn't for Chris keeping us in check as the cage. It's a weird dynamic because while we are controlling Chris, we are also bound to their limitations as a human in Deltarune. Even then we don't know what we can do as a player because Deltarune as a game has to prompt an action from the soul for us to execute it. And then the Weird Rod kinda turns that whole thing on its head where we prompt the game by doing evil shit to prompt us to exert power over Noel. As Jevil said, I can do anything. Except we don't know what we can do, and it's literally impossible for any storytelling medium to let the player do whatever they want in it. The Weird Rod is as far as you can go with that concept. That's not to discount it, to be clear, it is doing a great job of representing the concept of breaking a story. You know what, that was more convoluted than I thought, but it is also our introduction to the whole Chris and the soul situation, serving as a roundabout explanation of what is roughly going on and what we have to expect in our role as the soul. Also, to be clear, this is not stuff I'm unearthing for the first time. A lot of these interpretations have already been made individually, and even while just playing the game without analyzing it, you pick up some of this by just kind of feeling out the vibe. Spamton focuses more on Chris's perspective of this whole situation. Sure, they're not in a jail, but we are still restricting their freedom a lot, like being a puppet on a string. They can take their own actions without exerting themselves a lot, and the reason is some force that is beyond their understanding. Spamton's entire goal is to ascend past the darkness, free himself from the strings controlling him, and become his own person of free will. Now, I don't know if Chris wants exactly all that, but we definitely learn throughout our encounters with Spamton that they feel the same about wanting their own freedom. Incidentally, in a connection with the egg room, we can find an interpretation for hyperlink blocked here. A hidden link that is being blocked out, akin to the memories Chris doesn't want to recall. Man, I remember when there were a few months post chapter 2, everyone was trying to figure out the meaning of hyperlink blocked. Did that ever go anywhere? I feel like the most common interpretation ended up as freedom, but it wasn't very definitive. Not that freedom really meant much new in that context. Anyways, that's what I think. It's more about the whole memory situation. Not literally, but like, that's what's being invoked here. Chris is visibly stressed out after the whole Spamton encounter, potentially because of the implication that freeing yourself of the strings held over you comes at a cost. We can tell that they are worried about what would even happen if they were to fully free themselves from our influence. Chapter 3 plays out a little differently in the sense that we don't just get one character to reflect on Chris. It is a lot more scattered. We get Ramp, who's doing the "remember when that happened" thing. Fair enough, it's been a while. Then there's the Mantle game, how it relates to the normal game boards, and of course the ERAM fight. This dogwood in particular is special because Chris made it, which comes as a little bit of a shock at the end of chapter 2. Ramp does a lot of the heavy lifting to explain the background here. Chris was a very creative kid back then, playing a lot of pretend using various mundane items, often making up their own games. But Chris feels railroaded by Tenna's game. They want to go take a look behind the curtain and forge their own path. The Mantle game in particular has a lot of sinister implications that Chris is visibly not okay with, so it's not like that's a direct connection to what Chris wants. I think the content of the Mantle game doesn't matter much to Chris in particular. It's kind of a framing device to get reactions out of them. The ERAM dialogue adds onto that whole situation. There is a side of Chris that does not shy away from doing whatever it takes to achieve their goals. Seeing how Chris's eyes turn flickering red and how the soul starts taking damage in the ERAM fight, that other side of Chris is probably us as the player controlling them. Chapter 4 ends up as kind of an outlier because the whole secret boss questline is much more about Susie than Chris. Gerson more or less distances himself from engaging with the established theme so far by refusing the Shadow Crystal, and then just quietly passing it off at the end. It's a little strange because Gerson is the main guide NPC throughout the chapter and secret boss at the same time. If anything, he gives Chris advice outside of the secret boss storyline about finding their own path past the prophecy, strengthening the assertions from chapter 3. Deltarune's final secret boss stays very much on track for characterizing Chris's relationship with us as the soul. The two parts of Pink and Mad Dummy and Mew Mew parallel the soul and Chris, even to the point of Mad Dummy as a Lightner also being of a higher reality. The whole boss fight details Mad Dummy coming to terms with even having a body they can properly pilot. But the body itself isn't just a tool to be used. They exist just as much as Mad Dummy. So that sets up a conflict between what the pilot and body even want to do, something we're already intimately familiar with. Lore-wise, there isn't really much more here. I don't think the harmonious resolution that Pink achieves is something we can expect between us and Chris. But it is interesting that this fight, instead of focusing on Chris, holds up a mirror to us as the player. Recklessly taking over the life of a character in this world and expecting them to fully surrender their control to us. A convention that is the most normal thing in every single video game, but it gains a lot more depth in Deltarune because of the way it is. Making it kind of fucked up if you really think about it. Especially because our control over Chris goes a little further than just a fantasy fusion in a dark world. Resolving our connection with Chris will likely be much more complicated. And after all that, the fun gang comes back to Pink's shop for this new piece of dialogue. They notice a cat scratch from the friend image on Chris's hand and tell them about a mysterious person who owns a whole hunting pack of cats. Presumably the same person who all of the other secret bosses have also met. These cats are very stubborn hunters out for the protein that Chris has, and now this is important, people would go into hiding or change their appearance to get away from them. This is one of those lines you can easily interpret so literally that a whole new storyline gets constructed around it in a flash. It's enticing, I know, and with the way Deltarune is written it is possible, but it's just as possible that its only purpose is illustrating the relentless stalking of Friend. I for one think we're past the point where introducing a mysterious character that gets hunted for a mysterious reason fits well into the story. Sure, you can tie it back to Spamton, but why? If you've been diligently reading the notepad annotations, you'll have noticed that Deltarune loves to use its side stories as allegories that then tie back into the main story. It doesn't waste your time with them. As I said in another video, every piece of dialogue has its reason to exist. The optional secret boss storylines feed back into our understanding of Chris, and sometimes Susie. The optional light world storylines parallel potential upcoming character dynamics or strengthen the overall nostalgia-based themes. What does a Spamton is getting hunted by cats storyline achieve that isn't already being achieved right in front of our eyes by the Chris getting hunted by cats storyline? It just doesn't add anything new. With all that out of the way, we can finally and properly get to Friend. As all three secret side storylines are somewhat coming to a close, what is there to take away? Friend stands opposite to the eggs and the egg rooms. It is trying to prevent Chris from working on their trauma and remembering what really happened to properly heal. The eggs as tokens of Chris's progress are indicators that Friend should be hunting them down. It stalks Chris, stays in the shadows, often out of sight, but always nearby, and when there's a quiet moment, it pops back up like a painful memory. Friend is guilt. Friend is the trauma that Chris wants to so badly get away from, but it stays in the deepest depths of your psyche and fucks with you ever so slightly. And yes, some people would do anything to get away from that, to go into hiding and have a fresh start, but it's never that easy. There is no crazy Spamton subplot of him getting chased by cats in some far-off underground facility. We don't have the time for that. It's something that might have happened in the past, but Spamton is just with Chris the whole time now. There's virtually no difference between Friend hunting him or Chris. Spamton did his part in Chapter 2 and made some funny callbacks in Chapter 3 that he set up himself because he's kinda connected to Tenna, and that's that. He's a pair of glasses now and he'll rot in my inventory for the rest of his sad, pathetic digital life. You know why people are so hung up on Spamton? Because of these guys. Fuck you, fuck all three of you, and fuck whatever this shit is. This whole mic tease from Spamton shops was one of the most anticipated setups in Chapter 2, and it ended up in some unserious, fake-out meta humor, the answer was in your heart the whole time bullshit. Of course players want more from Spamton when a whole additional plotline was seemingly promised like that, and then completely fell flat.
You need a big shot!
No, I need answers! It's been 5 godforsaken years. Toby, please! We still don't know what Mike actually is or if he is real. Instead we got fucking Bluey. Are you telling me Mike is literally a microphone object and still somehow doing chores for Tenna? Or is Mike friend except it decided to enter a work contract with Tenna instead of hunting him? Is the microphone operating light fixtures? Is the magical concept of Mike operating light fixtures? Whatever Mike is has managed to somehow be even more undecipherable than friend. Connecting both of them just makes for the ultimate speculation glue trap. I'm not stepping into that shit. Mike, the concept of Mike, or whatever it actually is, can eat my entire ass. Look, I get the kind of point this whole scene is supposed to convey, and it's probably even intentional that it sacrifices the mystery of Mike for it, but this is like too much cynical, vague posting meta-commentary even for Toby. So instead of scraping a Spampton getting hunted by cats subplot out of some yet-to-be-explained plot ditches, why don't we just use the Chris gets emotionally destroyed by their past subplot that's already right here in front of us. Of course, the physical details of how that unfolds are separate from the subtextual interpretation I'm giving, and I'm truly not here to shit on everyone's imaginations of how that could happen. But if you think of the friend narrative as a cutaway horror chase scene including a bunch of secret bosses, then I'm afraid you have missed the entire point. Well, there's only one question left now. Who is that clandestine client sicking cats on Chris? It has to be Gaster, right? As the man everything meta, he's connected to all of these plotlines. Image friend being a device file, Chom's Gasterisms, Gaster's injection in the night fight, which is technically secret boss-ish, and the egg rooms being straight up glitches in between the actual game. I know, it's always Gaster, but this really is the one section of Deltarune that points to him over and over and over. Secrets, glitches, and abnormalities in games are his thing, and I really want to restate this device friend connection, making it a file tied to Gaster. Through that, it's marked as a game file that shouldn't exist in the conventional world of Deltarune, meaning outside of the dark and light world. They're reserved for menus, titles, and the Gorner Maker sequence. Device friend is the only outlier. I'm sorry, I just have to assume all of the convoluted Gaster knowledge that takes like an hour to explain, because editing an hour of a video takes like 2 months and I really don't have that time for something that has already been explained multiple times. You'll find out about it, I believe, in your innate sense of curiosity. That being said, why would Gaster be doing all this? Well, that's a level of concreteness that has us all still wandering in the dark, so this is where the character analysis that I'm pretty confident in stops, and throwing out vaguely sensible ideas based on what I've established so far starts. You've been warned. So here we go, what is the traumatic event that fucked up Chris for life and led to all of this going on? Chris, like many other secret bosses, also got a glimpse outside of the game of Deltarune. It's more or less implied that Chris was present during the event that led to Death's disappearance. That's what traumatized them. Death fell into some kind of rift exiting the reality of Deltarune, which is why they're lost and in the code as unused. And we already have precedent for Darkness going crazy over getting meta mindfucked. Chris being in therapy over it isn't far-fetched at all. Now why Gaster is sending meta-fictional cats after them is just as weird. Maybe they want to make sure Chris doesn't spill the secret to other characters. Friend is there to keep watch of Chris and make sure they don't mess up. The Forgotten Man, as in the therapist, might not actually be as opposed to Friend as is implied, and might instead be planted by Gaster as the only character Chris could talk to about their near-meta death experience. Hell, it could also just be Gaster. Who says he can't be both of the mysterious obscured men in this storyline? It could even be the impetus of why Chris has the soul in them. We know it is to exert control over them, but there's never been a reason or origin. So the soul as a tool to keep Chris in check and prevent them from shattering everyone else's illusion is very much in line with everything Deltarune has presented so far. With the knowledge that Axe, Shadow Crystals and Friend are converging into the same story thread, it'll likely be completed in the same event. Chom is preparing something with the Shadow Crystal. I don't know if that'll be the entirety of it though, kind of doesn't feel secret enough if you know what I mean. Either way, Chris will go off somewhere on their own one more time, or glitch out of the usual Darkwood timeline and face their guild. If we're ever gonna get a Chris versus the Soul fight or a Chris versus the Vessel fight, it'll probably be here. Something extremely personal to them, fighting their own psyche that has been messed with throughout the entire game. Well, there's your stupid friend video. No, it's not an aura-farming genocide hyper-angel of death, it's not a hyper-intelligent hitman, and honestly I still don't think Chris will lose their hand. I see so many parallels drawn from one abstract concept to another, or one intriguing text box to another, but parallels don't make a story. All of these vague implications are made about Friend, but it all leads nowhere. A story needs physical happenings, and those happenings need meaning. Otherwise, everything falls flat. I want to at least make something that's grounded in what Deltarune presented so far, and could actually happen. Some of the later game speculation here is partially supported by some claims I made in this video about Deltarune's dimensions, so you can watch that if you're interested. Now I have to go and finish up this video on the beginner's guide.